Welcome to the Hollywood Scholar. I'm Jed Morgan, and I just finished Last of Us Episode 8, When We Are in Need, and I am even more shocked than anybody else, but I have to unequivocally say that this is the best episode of The Last of Us so far. I would almost tentatively call it good, and that is for one reason and one reason only. David, the villain of the episode. We finally have a character that I feel is fully realized, that is very, very well acted, and has understandable motivations and an intimidation factor. It feels like he's actually putting in effort and talent behind that effort to such a degree that he stands head and shoulders above everybody else. He's that classic villain type that we love to hate. Very Umbridge from Harry Potter. That's the classic example I always go back to. You hate him with all that you have, but you love that you can do that. That's what a realized character can do for you, even if it's in a negative way like David does. And some of the other people in his party are great as well, including James, who is played by the actor who played Joel in the video game. There were several good performances from his end of the situation of the episode, the villain side of things. That was all great. Besides that, it does fall into several of the same issues as its predecessors, such as bloat, though not to the same degree as several of the previous episodes, and action. They still cut out the majority of the action of this episode, even though they promised that it would be a heavy action hitter. It wasn't, not whatsoever. They seem allergic to an action set piece taking longer than 10 seconds. It's ridiculous at this point. Action needs to take longer than 10 seconds, especially in a zombie action horror show. It's getting really, really ridiculous because they cut out all the zombies. There are no zombies in this episode. And one of my favorite parts of the original game is when you get to play Ellie for the first time. You do some tracking, you meet David for the first time, and then you get that really great zombie fight sequence with David as a tentative ally at that point before a bloater comes down and Ellie has to take out a bloater, which is a big moment for her. I love that sequence of the game. That sequence is why I thought Last of Us Part 2 was going to be great with Ellie as the protagonist. Wow, that didn't turn out very well at all, but that section was great. They cut it out nearly completely, and it's getting ridiculous at this point how they just are so adverse to any action in the show lasting longer than basically 10 seconds. But before I get any further, there will be spoilers ahead, so spoiler alert. This episode is relatively faithful to the games. I've kind of stood off against saying that for a lot of the previous episodes in this season, because in the Barris plot, yes, there are some similarities. Yes, there are the occasional scenes with dialogue straight from the games, but that doesn't necessarily make it accurate, especially if the characters themselves, which is the priority of the Last of Us video game, aren't translated over to the screen. In this one, a lot of characters were, especially David and James, and the scenery was very, very accurate. A lot of the set pieces were accurate. The episode, I would give a relatively high adaptation integrity score, and I don't feel like I've been able to say that with this season so far, with of course the exception of last week's Left Behind, which we can argue about the motivations for prioritizing that one's adaptation integrity. But the episode does follow Ellie trying to find some food for the injured Joel, who's still in a coma, coming across David and James, who she trades for some medicine with before they eventually capture her, and she discovers that they're cannibals, and David himself is a Sleepy Joe type person who sniffs kids, can't really say the word on YouTube, and then she has to fight her way out of there before meeting up with Joel, who's fighting his way in to get her. It's a great section of the game, and it's relatively accurately portrayed, translated over to the screen. There were definitely moments of this episode that I enjoyed. Most of them were with David, of course, but at the very beginning of the episode, even the Ellie stuff was very, very well done. I liked, before she said anything, the first 10 minutes of the episode, when she's just taking care of Joel, when she's going out hunting, she trips and falls, she has no idea what she's doing. There's some good characterization there. There's a few little interactions, but as soon as she opens her mouth, I remember how insufferable this girl is. Bella Ramsey is incredibly insufferable, and it's hard to take her seriously with how much she just growls with every line that she delivers. And it tore me out of the episode. I was really enjoying the first 10 minutes before she said her first line to David and James. If they'd gotten a better actress to play Ellie, I would tentatively call this episode really good, but she brings it down substantially. Her performance is borderline horrendous, even on the big set pieces at the end of the episode where her performance needs to be its strongest, where it's probably really easy to give a strong performance. She stumbles and falls at every single opportunity, and I can't stand her. And the same is very much true for Joel in his limited scenes, is he cannot deliver a line. Pedro Pascal does not deliver emotion whatsoever. He doesn't have gravitas. He doesn't have an intimidation factor, even in the torture scene, which I really enjoyed the torture scene because that is straight out of the game, line straight out of the game. The guys that he was torturing, they were giving phenomenal performances, far better performances than Pedro Pascal himself. But when he gives the classic line, it's okay, I believe him, he did not deliver that in any sort of intimidating way whatsoever, so I had to roll my eyes. That scene was great until Pedro Pascal had to act, just like every scene with Bella Ramsey and David. The scene was great until Bella Ramsey had to act. When your two stars are ripping me out of the episode, every time they open their mouths, you've got a major issue going on here, and they're the biggest problems with this episode. If you've gotten better performers, I really don't think there's a whole lot wrong with this episode. From a plot standpoint, it's all relatively cohesive. From a dialogue standpoint, most of it's relatively cohesive with the exception of the changes they made to Joel's classic torture line. It's I believe him instead of I believed him. I know it's a minor nitpick, but it does change the scene to such a degree that it's not as impactful because Joel is acknowledging that he just killed that man. It's very minor, but the dialogue is relatively sound, so if you've gotten better leading performers, this episode could be a good 7.5 out of 10, but they diminish the quality so much that I cannot give it that high of a score. This is the first episode that I think is well written. There is nothing writing-wise that I have against it, with of course the exception of cutting out the action and the violence to such a strong degree. With that exception, it's very well written. Moving on from them a little bit, the David scene where he tries to justify himself to Ellie while Ellie is locked up is without a doubt my favorite scene of the episode because he really delivers his performance to the furthest degree in that scene. You can see him acting, you can see him imploring, he's telling the truth, and it's so incredibly well done. It's that scene that really cements him as the best acted character in the entire show. I can say that with little hesitation. He's without doubt the greatest performer that this show has to offer. And even in that final scene, the diner fight, he had a little bit of clunky dialogue, but that actor carried it. He was so talented that he was able to still sound intimidating, even when he's asking Ellie, yo, what's your secret, in a really cheesy way. He delivered it. He made this episode. Without him, this episode would be just above average, just above mid, but he carries it to a new level. However, with him, there is a bit of an issue that I predicted several weeks ago, in fact, that they would take the opportunity to show the good guys as communists, as left-wing Utopia. We knew that for a very long time, for about a month before the show came out, that they would be portrayed as communists. And as soon as I heard that, I thought they were going to take the opportunity to show the villains as right-wing religious types. And I was proved 100% correct in this episode, and that's probably my biggest problem with it, besides the lead actor's performances, is the fact that they made these people very uber religious, uber Christian. It's very unnecessary, doesn't really add a whole lot. We already got the cult mindset, we already got everything we needed from them, and it just feels like propaganda. Maybe that isn't felt the same way for a lot of other people. Maybe I'm just hypersensitive to wokeness these days because of how much it's infected modern media, but I definitely felt that was a conscious decision to make the villains right-wing religious types and the awesome, humanized, great people communist. It seems a little too blatant and a little bit too coincidental to be just passed off and ignored. Let me know in the comments below if you guys felt that it was definitely propaganda. I felt it was that way, and maybe it's just me though. But moving on from that, with the exception of a few very nitpicky stuff that I'm going to mention in a moment here, I think this episode is very strong. I don't have any major criticisms for it, besides these nitpicks, such as the saddle. They left the horse saddled up. That's a big nitpick for me because I was raised around horses. I know how to take care of a horse. I know how to brush it. I know what you're supposed to do, but Ellie just left her horse saddled up in the garage, and yes, she doesn't know what to do, but it's pretty obvious that a horse wouldn't be comfortable standing there for days on end saddled up. So that is very nitpicky, and it was weird how she went and collected a bucket of snow and didn't wait for it to melt. The reason I know that is because when she lifts up the bucket for the horse, they don't use water sounds, they use crunching sounds. So the horse is literally eating snow. It's a very odd choice. Very nitpicky, but it was weird and immediately ripped me from the episode. Finally, it is odd, a change that they made from the video game. In the video game, Ellie left Joel to hunt and she never came back. And so there's potentially a day in that interim where she was gone from Joel, and that's when she got captured and whatnot. And they justified Joel waking up and having a different physical disposition than he would previously when Ellie left. In this one, she actively hands him a knife, which she does in the game, but she says, hey, they're coming right now. You need to defend yourself. And he passes out because he's still in a coma. But 5 minutes later, he's a tank taking out 3 guys, no problem. That is a major issue. At least the video game gave the slight justification of a day to finally break the fever, to get out of the coma. 5 minutes is not long enough to fully justify a full transition from comatose to badass tank. And with that, those guys who were searching for him, one of them immediately walks into the correct house. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of houses in this town, several of them, many of them between where Ellie was captured and where Joel was. There's a lot of houses in between them, but this guy goes straight into the house, sees the bookshelf that's covering the entrance to the basement right away, and goes straight to Joel. That is incredibly unlikely. The statistics on that are astronomical, I imagine. So it's a coincidence that he finds him right away, and it's a coincidence that Joel is in full top fighting shape enough to win that fight right away. Yes, he does do sneak, but it is unbelievable that he can't even muster up a word to Ellie when she tries to shake him away. He can't even stay awake, but less than 5 minutes later, he's killing people. It's just really unrealistic. It is a bit of a nitpick. The game did the same thing, but the game went to a further extent to justify that happening. Those are my thoughts on When We Are in Need. I wouldn't call this a great episode by any stretch of the imagination. I would easily say that it is the best episode of the season without doubt, and there were moments that I really, really enjoyed, most of them to do with the great performance of David's actor. There are a lot of issues with it, like I mentioned, specifically the performances, so I'd have to round this out at a 6 out of 10, and that is a far higher rating than I believe that I would be giving this season after the abysmal previous episodes. The last few have been really bad. It started out really mid with the first 2, went really bad, came back for a little bit in episode 4, went really bad again, came back a little bit for episode 7, but episode 8 is strong. If this were a normal television show and this is the worst episode that we got, it would be a great season of television. But as this is only the best episode of the season so far, it kind of counteracts the rest of the season because it proves that they're capable of making a good episode and they're just choosing not to, or this is a matter of a broken clock striking true twice a day and they just stumbled across basic competency. But I would definitely say this is an episode worth watching if you survived this long into the season and gotten through the utter drudge that was episodes 5 and 6. If you made it this far, then this is at least a little bit of a reward for surviving this long. Who knows if episode 9, the finale, will be any good. There are a lot of talks from specifically Bella Ramsey that it's going to be incredibly divisive, so I have little doubt that it will end as poorly as has been the average of this season so far. But anyway, that's all I have for today. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Anon.
Hey, yo, are you feeling what I'm doing up in here? Oh, I know you are. Do you miss all the good, compelling stories that we used to get back in Hollywood that they ain't putting down no more? Oh, I know you missing it. So check out my book series, Odyssey of a Phoenix, a mythological epic about philosophy, morality, and modern-day mental illness issues, baby. Book 1, Down in Flames. Book 2, Apocalypse Then. These are currently on sale. What are you waiting for? Get your hands on them. And we got Book 3, Kill the Dark, is coming down the pipeline. Just wait for all the good stuff that's dropping. You ain't gonna be disappointed, fam.